Morning to you on this Friday. I'm John Scott.
Friday, we made it.
Yes, we did.
We did. We're celebrating. We've got our green on. I've got a green pen. There you go. All
Happy
right.
St. Patty's Day.
There you go. I'm Melissa Francis. The White House is punishing Moscow for cyber attacks targeting the U.S. power grid and for meddling in the 2016 presidential election.
Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge live with more from Washington. Catherine.
Well, thank you, John, and good morning. The Russian government is vowing to expand its own blacklist of Americans in response to the new U.S. sanctions that target 5 entities and 19 individuals, some of which were indicted last month by the Russia Special Counsel Robert Mueller for meddling in the U.S. election. These sanctions, which include freezing financial assets, go beyond the U.S. election in 2016 and allege that Russian proxies targeted critical infrastructure, including nuclear, water, and the electrical grid. On Fox This Morning, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee put it this way.
I think he is sending a message that what Russia has been doing across the board is unacceptable. And a similar message is conveyed because of the targeted assassination in Britain, where the president stood with our allies and made it clear that we're not going to accept that.
We're also waiting for a decision this morning from the Attorney General on whether he will fire the FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe. The recommendation comes from the FBI's disciplinary office that investigates allegations of misconduct. McCabe took the unusual step of going to Maine Justice here in Washington, D.C. Thursday to plead his case and preserve his government pension. We are told the most likely outcome is that his government pension will be reduced because the legal bar is high to take away the pension altogether. The recommendation to terminate McCabe grew out of the independent review of the FBI and Justice Department's handling of the Clinton email case by Justice Department Inspector General, you see here, Michael E. Horowitz. Fox News is told that McCabe was not forthcoming with investigators and may have deliberately misled them. After FBI Director Comey was fired by President Trump last year, McCabe testified to Congress that he and the Bureau are above politics.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Now back to that deadly bridge collapse in Florida. At least 6 people were killed and 10 more injured yesterday when a pedestrian bridge at Miami University gave way. New video capturing the moment when it happened. The university says construction crews were using an accelerated method to streamline the building process, reducing risks for workers and minimizing traffic disruption. There are also reports that the bridge had undergone a stress test before its collapse. Authorities not confirming that during a news conference less than an hour ago, they said delivering closure to the families of the victims is their primary focus now.
Our priority, which is the most critical thing, is to get to the victims, get to the remains of the people that are underneath that bridge. This is a tragedy that we do not want to reoccur anywhere in the United States.
All right, joining me now is Mark Ash, a TransPro Chief Executive Officer. His company does consulting work on transportation safety issues nationally and in Florida, and writes about U.S. infrastructure in his book, Saving America. What do you think went wrong here?
You know, it's just, as a Florida resident, Melissa, it's just such a tragedy. We've had now 2 in the last month, and I think this is one of those. It's just the American people expect us to be able to cross bridges and go under bridges, have safe water systems, and it's just this absolute failure of government to be able to deliver projects that are safe. It's one of the key elements of this process is the testing phase, and you only need to look at the pictures to see that we didn't get that right here. And as a result, we've got grieving families in Florida, and it's just unacceptable to try to rebuild our infrastructure and not be able to get it right so that parents have the ability to get their kids to school safely.
Why do you say that this was a failure of government? You're not blaming the construction company that put the bridge together?
So let's all agree that at the end of the day, we're going to contract out a number of these services. But government has a responsibility to provide oversight to ensure that companies are doing these things the right way, right? We have oversight for water systems, even though the private sector delivers much of it. We have oversight for food systems, even though the private sector delivers much. And the same is true with transportation. Private companies build bridges and pave roads, but the government needs to provide oversight so that the American people are safe.
You think more government is the solution to this problem of the bridge collapse? I have a tough time getting there.
No, I'm not suggesting more government. I'm suggesting government doing the job to ensure before they let cars go underneath a new bridge that's been put in place, it's actually, we can ensure that it's safe. You know, clearly in this situation, it's not. We can't continue to introduce either old bridges where we've got up in the Northeast, for example, hundreds of thousands of people crossing bridges that the government knows is not safe, and we do it every day. Here we've built a new bridge, and we've not worked to ensure it's okay to let those cars pass underneath it. That's a cornerstone of government, Melissa, to make sure it actually is safe to drive under the bridge.
Well, it is amazing that this was the point at which the bridge was put up. It was put up in a day. It was brought in pieces. And, you know, if you take it back to also that deadly train accident as well on the very first run, there is something very fundamental that is going wrong in these cases. Thank you. I wish we had more time. Thank you.
You bet.
Republicans push for a recount in that Pennsylvania special congressional election. Democrat Conor Lamb claims victory in a district President Trump won by 20 points in 2016. But Lamb's margin of victory over his Republican opponent, Rick Saccone, was razor thin. Now GOP officials are claiming that voting irregularities may have given Lamb the edge.
I thought that the process was flawed. There are other issues that I'm just being informed about with the machines themselves. And I know that there are some potential voter irregularities in Allegheny County, which has a giant chunk of the electorate.
There is still no official winner in Tuesday's election, but with all precincts reporting, Lamb is leading Saccone by more than 600 votes. Still, Republican officials are challenging the outcome, urging a recanvassing of the totals.
Terrible news from overseas. Central Command reports all those on board a U.S. military helicopter in northern Iraq have died. It is the first deadly aviation crash for the U.S. military in Iraq or Syria since 2014. The crash happened near the Syrian border, the Pentagon saying the crash does not appear to have been caused by enemy fire. A U.S.-led coalition is working with Iraq and Syrian forces in the region, helping to make sure foreign fighters and insurgents can't move freely across the area.
A court upholds a controversial Texas law banning sanctuary cities. As leaders in that state shift their focus to implementation, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton joins us after the break to explain what's coming next.
There's no difference in someone who looks like me, who's a U.S. citizen, and somebody who's from Mexico who doesn't have documents.
It's a sensible ruling by the court that just said it's right to have a law that requires the police to enforce the law.
A year after Governor Greg Abbott signed it into law. And while the bill has sparked backlash from immigration advocates, state leaders are working now on implementation and enforcement. Joining us now, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. General Paxton, I know you worked hard on this bill. You are applauding the fact that it has been given the green light in the appeals court. What do you think Texans will see in terms of, lifestyle improvement as a result?
Well, first of all, it was a huge victory for Texas. It's a huge victory for the rule of law, and it's a huge victory for safety. It gives our law enforcement the ability to protect Texas citizens across the state, and it stops cities from protecting illegals who have committed criminal acts.
But the detractors say it's going to lead to discrimination. How do you answer that?
Well, the bill is not designed for that at all. It's merely designed to make sure that people who are here illegally, who have committed crimes, that they are deported, and that officials that are responsible for those have the opportunity, or they have to cooperate with the federal government. It also allows law enforcement to just ask about immigration status. So these are not designed to do anything but make sure that the citizens of Texas are safe.
Yeah, if I'm out driving around in my car and weaving and a cop pulls me over and smells alcohol, he's allowed to ask me if I'm drinking, right? Why is it such a big deal that police are now in Texas allowed to ask the immigration status of somebody they detain?
Well, you are asking a question that I've never been able to answer, and that is, why would these cities, Austin, Houston, Dallas, El Paso, San Antonio, sue the state over this bill? Because this is a bill that really is about making sure that those who have committed crimes, who are here illegally, that we take care of moving them out of our state. Why is it that these cities are so protective of people that are both illegal and who have committed crimes.
You're also going to be able, under this law, you're going to be able to actually remove from office or maybe even arrest a sheriff or, sheriff's official who doesn't follow the law. Do you expect that's actually going to happen?
Well, we've already got complaints. I can't specifically talk about the details of those complaints, but yes, I mean, there's civil penalties against cities or officials that do this that are large. There are the potential, as you said, for removal from office, which is obviously a severe penalty, and then a Class A misdemeanor where you can serve up to a year in jail and up to a $4,000 fine. So yeah, Texas is taking this seriously because we do care about the safety of our people.
The biggest cities in the state, as you mentioned, fought against you on this: Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin. They can practice selective enforcement, can they not? I mean, they can just kind of simply ignore the law if they choose.
I suppose there are ways around every law. I wouldn't recommend that because ultimately, if they do that, I think the legislature will respond with further laws to try to curtail that. So ultimately, I just hope that most cities will cooperate and do what they're supposed to do, which is turn over illegals who have committed crimes to the federal government and allow their law enforcement to do their jobs. I don't see what the problem is.
How did we get to this place where cities and states kind of decide selectively which federal laws they want to enforce?
I think it's an interesting question. I really honestly think it goes back to President Obama and how he sort of built a culture of not enforcing laws he didn't want to enforce and enforcing others that he did want to. And I think it sent a message on down the line that, yeah, you don't have to follow the law, but if we get outside of the rule of law and cities doing their own thing, then we end up running amok and having all kinds of problems.
Well, after California has declared itself a sanctuary state, it'll be interesting to watch what happens to, crime rates and other things, California versus Texas. Well, in the months to come. Go ahead.
Well, we definitely know from our own statistics that we have significant crime as a result of illegals, and so what they are doing to their own citizens is unfortunate. They're going to end up with some of the consequences of higher crime rates, higher murder rates. I mean, it's just a reality.
Attorney General Ken Paxton from Texas, thanks very much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Russia threatening retaliation over new U.S. sanctions as the Trump administration targets Moscow over a plot for a cyber attack on our power grid. Plus, a manhunt is underway for the person who threw a boulder off an overpass, killing a California man in his car. The man's sister is now demanding justice.
I'm asking everyone to help find the person who did this to him. It was really unfair because he left one little girl.
Crashing down on a car in California, killing the passenger. Now a manhunt is underway for the suspect. Take a look at the damage to the Toyota Corolla. Police say someone pushed a 30-pound rock off an overpass above a freeway. Happened Tuesday in Pasadena. That rock landed on 22-year-old Christopher Lopez, who was riding in the passenger seat. He died at the hospital. Authorities believe that rock was dropped off the overpass intentionally.
Russia now planning to expand its American blacklist in response to new sanctions from the Trump administration, the president taking his first major action against Moscow.
The Trump administration is accusing Russia of breaching the U.S. energy grid along with other critical infrastructure, including nuclear, aviation, and water systems. The U.S. is also slapping sanctions on 19 people, including the 13 Russians who were indicted last month by Special Counsel Robert Mueller for election interference.
Joining me now is Arizona Congressman Andy Biggs. He's a member of the House Judiciary Committee and the Freedom Caucus. Sir, thank you for joining us. This is a really frightening story. I mean, when you talk about Russians breaching the nuclear, aviation, the water systems, obviously critical infrastructure, a lot of damage has been done. Does this action go far enough?
Well, these are very serious things that the Russians have done, and you're right, the critical infrastructure of everything that basically most Americans' lives revolve around. We have to respond. If Russia had done this through some kind of hard means and physical means, we'd be asking for a different kind of response. But here, because it's digital, we don't seem to see it so much. Because we were able to thwart most of it, we don't seem to see it so much. These sanctions are critical. We have to find the individuals, find the groups within actually the Russian government, address those sanctions, sanction those people directly, and Congress has given that authority. It's a necessary first step. It has to be aggressive.
Some say it's not aggressive enough, including Senator Mark Warner. Here's what he had to say.
First of all, this is long overdue. The administration missed its deadline, and that was very disappointing. What continues to concern me is while you have the Administration Act, there still seems to be a great reluctance for the president himself to call out Russia as a bad actor.
Do you think that's true? Do you think the president is reluctant? It did take him a little while, and, you know, perhaps this was a response to the nerve agent being used in the UK.
Well, I don't think he waited too long. I mean, the authority was given by Congress last year. There were deadlines in there, but he has to meet deadlines. But I think he was also looking, what a lot of us wanted to see was evidence. And now we see the evidence. It's there. And now we have to respond aggressively. I think the sanctions are a way to go. I think that we have to project power with Russia. We have to engage in harsher terms of diplomacy. But I mean, you have to be bellicose in a way that you don't spur an acceleration or an escalation of this type of conduct, but you have to show American resolve. And I think the president is taking the right measured resolve here, and we're going to have to do more, quite frankly, in the way of sanctions against Russia.
But if you contrast, you know, the way that he's responded to North Korea and the way he's responded to Russia, I mean, obviously there are different things that you're trying to prevent there, but it is, you know, two different leaders, you know, where somebody said basically what you just said, that you don't want to respond too strong where you escalate the situation. That's what people said to the president about North Korea. He went in very harsh anyway, and it seems like in that situation it's working, but he's taken such a different approach here. Do you think that's appropriate?
Yeah, I think it's appropriate. You have two different situations here, but you have two very different political leaders. You have Kim Jong-un, who is trying to accomplish something very different than I think that Mr. Putin's trying to do. So I think that the president has to take different responses, but there's no doubt we have to be very strong, and the president has to show real resolve against Russia in this particular circumstance. And I also think that you're right. We need more evidence with regard to the use of the gas poison on these folks in England. But this is really serious, and we have to step up the pressure on Russia.
Real quick before you go, I know that you have been very outspoken about wanting Veteran Affairs Secretary Shulkin to resign. Why is that?
I just think that he has not demonstrated the leadership for the culture change we need. We're seeing the same problems, and remember, my own VA was Phoenix, the very epicenter of the crisis. Things have too slowly proceeded to make them better. Yeah. The other problem I would say is I can't get anything done. We have two people this is what they do. They do nothing but veterans casework. And I have to intervene many times because we're not getting the action at the local level or even with the secretary's level.
Congressman, thanks for coming on today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, guess what? We might soon be hearing more from Stormy Daniels. She's speaking out in a new interview set to air on 60 Minutes, of all places. So what are the implications for President Trump? Our media panel weighs in. Plus, investigators just beginning to look into the deadly bridge collapse in Miami as emergency crews sift through the rubble, trying to recover any more victims.
There is the possibility, the sad possibility, that under the concrete there may be additional vehicles.
Back to one of our top stories, rescue efforts shifting to recovery after a newly installed pedestrian bridge collapsed in Miami. At least 6 people have died, and emergency crews say there may be more bodies buried under the rubble as investigators begin to look into what happened and who should be held responsible.
Right now, we just want to find out what occurred, what caused this collapse to occur, and people to die. We want to get to the bottom of this, the bottom line of what occurred, so that we can bring closure to the families, bring closure to the investigation, and so that it doesn't happen again. That's the most important thing here.
Let's go live to Steve Harrigan, who is at the scene this morning. Steve, welcome.
Melissa, certainly an agonizing wait for the family members of the missing. The head of fire rescue has said this is now a recovery operation. He said there's no one left alive in that 950 tons of concrete rubble behind me. They were out all night long with dogs, with listening devices. No one survived at this point. Right now, the death toll stands at 6. That number could go up. Among those 6, at least 1 student. And the bridge collapsed at 1:30 in the afternoon during a red light. It happened so suddenly, even some veteran first responders on the scene were shocked.
It was chaotic at first, and once I did get down from the bridge after we helped the construction workers, I actually started to crawl underneath the bridge, and I got yelled at by fire rescue, like, what are you doing? There's nothing you can do. And I realized at that moment, okay, yeah, there's nothing I can do. The cars are basically about 4 foot high. That's how crushed they were. It was a terrible thing to see, knowing that there's people in there that you just cannot get to, and that the major loss of life when I started counting all the cars. One of our officers was able to assist the vehicle on the end. The driver, she was crushed, but we were able to get the passenger out of that vehicle.
This is a slow-moving investigation, in part because some of that concrete behind me is still unstable. It may take up to 1 week to find out why this bridge collapsed and who's responsible. Melissa?
It's just such an awful story, Steve Harrigan. Thank you.
The CBS News is planning to air an interview with Stormy Daniels, according to the Washington Post. Her real name, Stephanie Clifford. She claims she had an affair with President Trump in 2006. The president has denied that. The Post also reports the White House never tried to stop the interview.
Well, we've been clear for some time now that Ms. Clifford wants a forum, a platform in which she can tell her story unrestrained, can tell the American people the truth about what happened, not just about the relationship with the president, but also about the attempts by the president and Mr. Cohen to muzzle her and prevent her from telling her story.
Michael Cohen, the president's personal lawyer. All right, so she wants to tell her story. The question, should CBS give her the platform? Joining us, Vince Colanese, editorial director of The Daily Caller and host of Mornings on the Mall. Also, Katie Glick, senior political correspondent for McClatchy Newspapers and co-host of McClatchy's Beyond the Bubble. Katie, are you surprised that a program like 60 Minutes is going to put an adult film star on?
Well, this is an issue that has certainly been in the news cycle for several weeks. Almost every day it seems like there's a new development to this story. And, the reality is that this is a story that deals with the ultimate public figure, with the president. This is a distraction that's been hanging over the White House for weeks. And certainly if she, in fact, does go ahead and go on air, it's going to add only more fuel to that fire. But I think no doubt that this is a really big story involving perhaps our most prominent citizen.
Vince, public service or ratings stunt?
It's tabloid fodder. I mean, look, Stormy Daniels and CBS and every other outlet who's covering this really aggressively have a shared interest, which is they want to get a lot of eyeballs and they want to make a lot of money off of covering this story. There's clearly a business interest here. Forget $130,000 in a settlement. Stormy Daniels has been touring the country at strip clubs all over the place. I've never seen so many reporters find such a thin hook to attend a strip club and then write about it. I've seen story after story after story of what that's like. And meanwhile, she's benefiting big time off of all of the coverage they're providing our media because they see it as an opportunity to really hit Trump, and they think it's going to hurt him.
Now, is there any hypocrisy here, Katie? I mean, the media could be looking at a lot of other things. 60 Minutes has some great reporters. They could be doing any other story in the world on March 25th.
I don't know about hypocrisy there. I mean, again, this is a story involving the President of the United States, involving people who are very close to the President of the United States. Certainly the White House has denied this, but no doubt storylines on this front have been playing out since the campaign, and certainly, we are seeing additional allegations come forth now.
There are a lot of past presidents, Vince, who are probably grateful that they didn't get this kind of scrutiny.
That's true, and look, I think this assessment of this has happened since the campaign, that's true, and the American people voted for Donald Trump anyway. And in light of that, I think what we should look closely at as a press is, first of all, what are American voters interested in, and what effect does any particular story have on the average American voter? This one, again, is in the realm of tabloids, because I don't think at the end of the day it does have much of an effect on the American voter.
And worth pointing out that the incident she says supposedly happened 10 years ago. I want to turn your attention to another issue that caught our attention. There's that new surveillance video just released of the deadly school shooting in Parkland, Florida. It shows the deputy, the former school resource officer, Scott Peterson, standing outside Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School while the shooting is going on inside. Now, this comes after media outlets petitioned authorities to make it public. So, Katie, now that it's public, what did we learn?
Well, it certainly confirms what we've been hearing about his reluctance to go into the school, even though that was his job according to authorities there. And it certainly adds more fuel to the argument that you're hearing, especially from a lot of Republicans, that before you can talk about sort of more sweeping measures as it relates to gun control, you have to take a look at sort of what happened, what went wrong on the ground there. That's an argument certainly you are hearing from some conservatives across the country, and this adds into that, even as, of course, we are seeing action from other Republicans, including and especially in Florida, to actually take steps toward tightening gun control measures.
There's always, Vince, the argument that the more you run these, pictures of terrified students, and in this case, a security guard, a trained deputy who's frozen in place, the more you glorify the attackers who are doing this kind of thing. What about that here?
Well, that's clearly a challenge. It's always going to be a challenge in the wake of a shooting like this. And also the media, I think, has to definitely do some soul searching on how they want to cover these things. But it's hard to suppress even the name of a shooter getting out in light of the world that we live in with social media. So much of this is going to get around whatever self-imposed media restrictions we have. I do think, though, that there should not be much argument about this notion that he was caught standing outside. This is a part of a cavalcade of errors. There are dozens of errors that the government made leading up to that shooting in Parkland, and there really should be an examination of that before the press runs around giving a whole bunch of in-kind contributions to people who are just simply calling for gun control.
Yeah, a football coach inside gave his life trying to protect his student, and a trained deputy outside stays outside. Martha MacCallum had Ben Shapiro on her program on Wednesday night. Here's what Ben Shapiro had to say on the story regarding the way some of these student protests have developed. Listen.
The media has put forward this message, and they've been doing this for years, but it's really, I think, accelerated in the last few months, and particularly in the last few weeks. They've been putting forward this message that if you disagree with them on gun control, then this means you don't care enough about the kids. And now they are activating these kids and putting them out on the front lines and putting them in photo ops so that they can essentially use them as political